Just want to thank everybody for coming out. I'm really excited about tonight's presentation. For those of you who aren't familiar with Providence Geeks, I will be talking about Kenzan's collaboration with Brian and Joel from Providence Geeks and helping them develop a website and a community. Brian and Joel, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say before we get into it, but please feel free to comment up if you do. Yeah. Whew.
Thank you, sir.
No problem. Thank you.
So, Providence Geeks is a meetup, informal meetup. We call it the Providence Geek Dinner, and sometimes people think that means we all sit down at a long table. And no, we mainly just eat a lot of food, drink, and try not to spill either on each other. We've been meeting up at AS220 and occasionally other places for the last 11 years. We had a special off-site event that Kenzan hosted at Sons of Liberty Beer and Spirits, I get their name right, where we had some great food, courtesy of Kenzan, and lots of whiskey. It's the second awesome thing in the space of a year that Kenzan has done. I don't know what we did at Providence Geeks to deserve all this, but thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
I can't let Brian just speak. No, actually, what I was going to say is what was really cool is they approached us and said, can we collaborate with you and sort of help you build out what you believe Providence Geeks 2.0 would be all about. But what's really cool is if you think about it, I think we're probably still doing it. The original website, so Brian and I met up more recently about, a year or so ago. We're kind of like, all right, so what's been happening with Providence Geeks? Like, no, it's kind of gone a little stale. So right at the time that Brian and I sort of rebooted it, we were thinking more about it being not just Providence Geeks, but also sort of a collaboration, bringing more tech folks together, bringing more meetups. These folks approached us and said, well, maybe we can help you also with your rebranding. So we went from Providence Geeks redirecting to a Facebook page to what you're going to see today, which is really pretty amazing. I guess that's probably the best.
Thank you. Yeah, we're super excited. Awesome. Well, with no further ado, let's get into it. So just real quickly, the spirit of formalities. So Kenzan, for those of you who aren't familiar with what we do, we're a consulting services company. Essentially what we do is we help our clients realize the products that they want to build and they want to ship. Our special focus is on technology, operations, automations. We've been moving into the digital transformation space. So essentially what that means is for the better part of the kind of the past development practices, a lot of organizations needed technology because they had maybe something they wanted to sell. So of course they need a website to sell that thing. But they're really masters of the product they're selling, not the website they're maintaining. Fast forward to now, to sell something to be really ubiquitous and to be able to meet customer demands, you have to know a little bit more about technology to ship faster, to spread your services across the globe if that's something that you need. I mean, it's not for everybody, but for our clients, it is. And so digital transformation really means for a company where technology wasn't their core competency, we now help them make technology part of their core competency. It is now infused into the organization, helps them make better decisions, how to build, how to release, how to ship, when to do things, when not. And so that's pretty much a synopsis of what we've done and what we're doing now with a fancy name. So operations, so DevOps, front end, back end, API, AWS, cloud. If you name it, we probably do it. We also like to write and talk about it a lot, like we do with these meetups. If you like to read about it, I highly recommend you check out our blog at techblog.kenzan.com. Lots of cool articles there. Covers the entire gamut. It's not just tech stuff. So we're primarily a tech company, but it's not the only part of our composition. Culture is a big part of that, and I think our tech blog really reflects that too. So a little bit about myself. I'm a director of engineering here at Kenzan. With our clients, I help lead our teams of PMBAs, technical architects, developers through that software delivery lifecycle, whether it's a digital transformation or not. Do a lot of training and a lot of kind of business analysis. My particular specialty and interest is in front-end architectures and performance, build tools, and release management. On the side, I like to dabble in some music production, technical writing, open source stuff, and I've actually just recently started a co-working space in Newport to help facilitate all that kind of stuff. So there's some really cool stuff happening down there with some meetups around open data. I know that's kind of a big interest amongst some of our attendees here in career dev, so please let me know if you're interested, or if you just kind of want to follow along, feel free to check all those links out. So what did we want to talk about tonight? Well, we are here to talk about Kenzan helping build a new website for Providence Geeks, but more than that, it needed to be a website that we felt best represented the community in terms of how it communicates and how it collaborates. And in addition, we wanted to take it as an opportunity to, our past meetups might focus on one particular technology, one particular technique. What we never really got to work on in a really open source fashion was an entire project, start to finish. As you can see from the agenda, it follows a similar format to how we approach our development process. Now, the new part for us is kind of the product-driven stuff, and that was really exciting for us, but then we follow similar steps of designing the architecture, assembling project management, and the development. For our presentation here, we'll do a little show and tell, and then I've got a lot of exciting ways to share this with you guys to help take it over and make it your own. So first and foremost, I want to give a big shout out to all the people that both Brian and Joel from Providence Geeks, as well as the people in Kenzan. Our CTO, John Stockdill, was the project sponsor. I was the project lead. Alana Krasner, who works in our New York office, plus the awesome Kate Pisano, acted as kind of co-product owners. They worked a lot with Brian and Joel to make sure that our hunches and assumptions were on target with how they felt the website should help represent the community. Our New York dev tester, Sai Matsumoto, was project manager in QA, and Alana was also worked on design. And two of our awesome interns, Peter Holyoke and Marunalini Dewale, were our developers. What is not obvious from the list here is that Alana Krasner is actually our marketing manager. So she got to stretch out and take on a couple new roles herself. Kate is in charge of training and learning here at Kenzan recruitment, as well as some recruitment. So this was a great way to kind of help people, spread out a little bit and try out some new things. And as I mentioned, Sai was a dev tester, and she got to do some project management. Alana did some design. So I think the main point I want to point out is that anybody can find a way to contribute to a project. It doesn't have to be code. And so I really want to emphasize the agility of our team to really take on new responsibilities and help make this project the success that I feel that it was. And of course, you guys were probably the biggest motivation and driver for this. I can, from my personal experience over the past year and a half or so, really getting involved in the community, presenting myself, going out to the other communities. There's a lot of talent, and there's a lot of creativity in this city, in this state. And I know that Brian and Joel have seen it for a long, long time. if you know Arnell, you know that he sees it every single day, and Kenzan sees it too. And this was our opportunity to bring all that to life in a way that we felt would, challenge us, have us put our money where our mouth is to give back to the community, but more importantly, make sure that it was reflective of what would be helpful to you guys. And so I hope we accomplish that, and I guess you ultimately will be the judge. So, starting off, so our motivations and collaborations. So, so we had, over the course of last year, in particular, Kate and I think Isaac, if he's here somewhere. Oh, there he is in the back. I think we're probably the catalyst for getting this off the ground. They had been doing a lot of awesome community outreach with Tech Hire and Tech Collective, I think. And so they were really essential in helping kind of expand the crowd that came to our meetups. And so it was through that opportunity that we started to really see excuse me, some the opportunities within the community to help foster it. And like I mentioned, the more we saw what the community was capable of and their ideas and their enthusiasm and their passion, we knew that it would be an awesome opportunity for us to reach out to Brian and Joel to make this happen. And so, a lot of it was us wanting to give back and also to help foster that innovation and technology that we saw, provide a place to share knowledge, share content, and help Brian and Joel, help Providence Geeks. You guys are an institution here. So it was, I think it was a lot of it, I think, came down to some mutual respect and admiration of not only Kenzan and Providence Geeks, but the tech community of Rhode Island as well. So, so that's kind of where we're starting from. And so I think it, became, it was a very kind of intuitive relationship for us, for our two organizations to form. And so, as I mentioned in the first slide about Kenzan, we're consultants, we're contractors. We don't really have our own product. This is probably one of the only stages of the software delivery lifecycle we have very little experience in. And so I was most excited from a personal professional opportunity to help shape a product. And so really the whole process for me and for Kenzan, I believe, started with asking some questions to ourselves, trying to put ourselves in your shoes and asking back to us, questions like these. So trying to understand how the community learns, how we can help it grow, how we can set a good example. And so, once we started brainstorming with that, we also understood that social media and communication platforms were really big parts of that. That's this is how people stay connected, and there's a lot of them out there, but they all have their uses. And so we knew we had to infuse that kind of technology in to help us answer these questions. And so in doing so, we were basically trying to build up an idea, a vision of what the website would be, like what's the overall experience we're trying to deliver. And so because social media and communication platforms play such a big role in our ability to stay connected, and being that we're a tech community, it felt right to kind of focus on those areas. And so when we started off, we had a lot of options, right? Meetup, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, blog posts. Now, we wanted to help, but we only had a limited amount of time to do so. And we wanted to really take the opportunity to provide a good foundation, because we knew we weren't going to be there for the length of the entire life of the project. We want this to live for many, many years, be as useful as it can be for as long as possible. But our window to really make the most impact was limited, about 3 or 4 months, where we could kind of commit 100% to it. And so we had to really think about what's the best bang for the buck that we can get in that time. When we think about those questions, what platforms here really, really help us bridge that gap as quickly as possible in that amount of time, but also being mindful to set a precedent going forward. Ultimately, we see value in all of these platforms. So how do we make sure that it's easy, or there's a good example for down the road to add Twitter or video or any other form of content that might come up? And so we had some awesome brainstorming sessions, and in the end, we settled on these two. So we realized events, obviously, but just as important as it is for us to kind of aggregate curated events for the community, it was just as important for Brian and Joel representing Providence Geeks, and ultimately the community itself, to be able to kind of speak back. So the next natural feature we felt would be good to add is a blog component to the website. So that's kind of where we landed as far as features and products, and this would satisfy a lot of the objectives that we wanted from the website as a product in and of itself. Would still provide lots of good real-world examples of technology in action, and then also provide a good foundation going forward, and be useful right out of the, there's no value in us contributing to a website that wasn't already providing some sort of value to the community out of the gate. So this is kind of where we landed. So once we had the idea of the features we wanted to deliver, Alana started working on the styles. One of the first things that we came up with was the logo. For those of you that have been in Rhode Island and live here, or know the culture of the state, the anchor is very, very iconic. We're the ocean state. You representing, Darren? So, and this was great. As soon as Alana presented this, I loved it. We loved it. Brian and Joel loved it. It made sense. And so we went from there to developing a style guide. We started working on the colors, playing around. We had a couple different options. We presented those to Brian and Joel. And this is kind of what we ended up settling on. So it was really neat to think of the features, think of the brand, and then think of how to reflect that brand throughout the site. So I was really excited to see this process happen. I give a lot of props to Alana for making this work, and really being able to showcase some skills of her own, to the community and to Kenzan itself. So that's kind of the first phase of the project getting off the ground. Now my favorite part, the technical architecture. So referring back to thinking about some of those motivations in terms of setting a good example, providing some sort of foundation going forward, I wanted to factor a lot of that into the technical architecture, the infrastructure, the hosting setup that we should use. We wanted to leverage the cloud. That's pretty ubiquitous, at least in our day today. And we wanted, we knew that, and one of the other big ones is resiliency. We knew that even just in the beginning, we'd only be communicating with 2 external services as we defined them, meetup.com and a WordPress REST API. So hinging our entire feature set on 2 external services meant that we needed to be smart about how we rely on them for the functionality of our site. We wanted to automate where possible, where time permitted, and we still wanted it to be a familiar technology stack. So these were a lot of the things that I kept in mind. Cost was another one. So in certain cases, serverless made sense, where we could kind of just execute a process on demand, and I'll get a little bit into that. And also vertical scalability, right? You know, as we add more services, we want that to be a fairly comfortable pattern for others to adopt. So those were kind of some of the goals and criteria that I set for myself. And so keeping with the trends that we adhere to at Kenzan, AWS was our choice for infrastructure. Now, could have maybe used Google Cloud Compute or Microsoft Azure, but again, this was more of a learning exercise for the interns, not me, so I went with what I knew. And so I'm going to run through some of these services that we used. The main one, and there's a diagram to kind of put it all together, but before I get to that, I just want to make sure our understandings are similar before I start throwing out 3-letter abbreviations all over the place. So Route 53, so this is Amazon's domain name system service. Essentially when you type in www.myawesomesite.com, this is Amazon's version of taking that URL and mapping it to what they refer to as a hosted zone. But DNS essentially is the mechanism on the web that takes a URL and maps it to some computer, an IP that's running with an IP address somewhere, and matches those 2 together, similar to like the mail, right? You write someone's address, that's where it goes. And just like the mail, things can move and disappear, and it's all sorts of fun. Darren had an experience like that this morning, almost. Luckily, it was still there. CloudFront is their content delivery network. The idea behind a CDN is for an application that might have global reach. Not even necessarily global reach, but it certainly helps. The idea is that rather than have all your, say, if you're hosting a website, all your JavaScript and HTML and CSS on one server, and all your users from wherever get those files from that server, and it gets sent back. A CDN tries to establish points around the world where users will get the information from, will get those files from a point closer to where they are. And AWS handles all that. So wherever the user is, when the file gets requested and it's hosted on CloudFront, Amazon will take care of making sure that the user gets that file from the location closest to them. In addition, it's a cache, which means that once that file has been requested by someone for the first time, it now sits in that location, and which means that depending on how you configure it, generally the CloudFront won't have to keep going back and getting the original copy, and it really helps reduce the time to load and the latency of requesting files on the web. In conjunction with CloudFront, we used S3. In our case, so S3 is simple storage service. Essentially, it's like a hard drive on the web. What they refer to as an object, you can think of as a file. And so you create directories, essentially called buckets. And so we hosted a number of things here. The main one was the actual front-end website, all the HTML and JavaScript and CSS. We hosted in S3. It has a feature which lets you use it for static website hosting. So in our case, CloudFront and S3 talked to each other, and that handled the mechanism. So we didn't have any servers, no Apache, no Nginx, nothing like that. We just flipped a switch in S3, and we got web server hosting. So that was pretty neat. Yes. Let me get through these three, and then I'll get to questions before the diagram. Cool, awesome. So API Gateway is a service that Amazon offers. Essentially, it, at least in the way that I used it, which I think is the way it's supposed to be used, we were able to create endpoints for each of these APIs we were going to develop. So our events API for our meetup events and our posts API for our WordPress blog posts. We wanted to give unique URLs like API/events/posts. So API Gateway allowed us to handle requests and send them to the appropriate server that was designed to fulfill requests for events or posts. Elastic Cloud Compute, EC2, are those servers in that flow. This is what hosted the actual APIs that were returning data for the front end. And lastly, the big one, you guys might have heard of it. We did a really awesome meetup on it last year. On serverless is Lambda. Essentially functions as a service. They have a very narrow and specific scope. They are used to execute code. The ability of that code to do certain things is limited, but for one-off tasks, scheduled tasks, like processing, anything that you can do within 5 minutes that doesn't require state, you can use Lambda for, and it's on demand. So if you want to, say, pull some data from an external service like meetup.com once a day, maybe you could use Lambda. And it'll just do that, run for 2 minutes, and be done, and you're not paying for anything other than those 2 minutes. So, so that was a lot of words and letters. I'll have a diagram to show, but yeah, I think it would be a good time to pause for a couple of questions. Hold on 1 second, we gotta, Carlos, you want to turn this on and off when it's time?
Go. And questions?
Questions?
I have one. Given that Providence Geeks is a nonprofit or whatever, what does something like that cost?
Cool. So the question was, what kind of costs would be associated for hosting a site like this? So right now, since it hasn't been formally released, some of our costs will probably not reflect a lot of the usage, but we're able to get by on the free tier for about, mostly eating up our EC2 credits, but this was free for about 3 or 4 months when it did start before, I forgot to add, we used Lightsail which is a managed VPS, which hosts our WordPress blog. Once that kicked in, that was $5, but so far our bills have been $5.51 a month for basically everything that you see here.
Is that traffic dependent?
And so, yeah, I mean, the CloudFront will increase as traffic increases, Gateway would, Lambda only runs once a day. That's fixed.
But it gives you 1 million requests. Lambda's free tier for 1 million.
Yeah. Right. Right, good point.
Right, yeah. Free. The Lambda API Gateway requests too are So EC2 is where the instance launch.
Yeah, that was, and in this architecture, there's definitely the case to be made that we could have could have used Lambda in place of EC2. At least for the sake of our interns, I wanted to have a little diversity in the architecture. So this was a good opportunity to give them that experience as well. So yeah, other questions, Joel?
Go ahead.
Remove EC2 because you don't really.
Yeah. So Providence Geeks 2.1 might remove EC2 is what you're saying?
Yes.
This is
Any other questions?
fun little cube.
This guy wants to read out.
No, you want questions? I'll just hold it and throw it to whoever has a question.
I think we have to turn it off when we're not using it, right, Carlos? It's not humming. I think you need to.
Carry on.
I am an amateur audio snob, so this works. So, so putting it all together, I apologize. Some of the colors didn't quite come through, but the important part is you kind of see the boundaries here. So I'm going to start real quick with the external services. So as you can see here, we've got Meetup and WordPress. So as I mentioned, WordPress, we are hosting on a light sail instance. That's AWS's managed VPS. So it provides common configurations and installations for Node, the mean stack, Java, WordPress, Drupal. So this is a click of a button, boom, WordPress instance server spun up, and it still has a lot of the AWS features like snapshots, backups, things like that. It is $5 a month, but it was something new for us to try too. Yeah, you don't have to manage your own WordPress instance. So even though it's technically in our network, I felt it was important to treat it just as any other external service that could go down without warning. So much like meetup.com and WordPress, we have a Lambda that is configured to hit the meetup.com API, another one that's configured to hit our WordPress REST API. And it will make the API request to get all events. So in the case of meetup.com, we have a predefined list of meetup groups, and that list can be iterated upon. We can add more groups to that list, and it'll save that as a JSON file, and it'll put that in S3. And then same thing for WordPress. It'll get the posts that are available from whatever Brian or Joel or anybody has created, saves that in S3. So that was our approach for data storage. Now, in a more robust architecture, you'd probably have maybe like a document store if you're doing JSON, or like NoSQL database. I haven't had much experience with those yet, and in the beginning I wasn't quite sure kind of where this might go, but that's definitely an additional consideration that we can certainly implement. And due to the nature of the meetup.com API, it only returns events that are happening now and in the future. So if we want to implement an archive feature, we will need to rely on some sort of document store like like Cassandra or whatever, something like that.
So if you're using Meetup and WordPress as the content management tools for the Providence.
So the WordPress was a way to facilitate Brian and Joel creating content, and then so basically we wouldn't have to create like an admin UI just to create posts. And then meetup.com is, yeah, literally getting data through their API to show a list of events on the site. Yep. So this is our architecture for getting things in. This is, managing our data store. Now, starting from the top here, so when a user types in the URL for the website, which is pvdgeeks.org, don't go to it yet, I mean, it's right there, you can see it. So the Route 53 will manage the URL traffic, the DNS traffic into our AWS network, our hosted zone. The request will then get sent to CloudFront first. Now, I know I said CloudFront was a CDN. One of the features I really like about it is it has the ability to configure what they refer to as behaviors. So based on the URL pattern, you can say, maybe send this request to this service or this say S3 bucket or this server, and send these requests to another. And so that's exactly what I did. Any URL pattern that started with /API, I'm going to send to API gateway. And anything else, at least in our setup, is going to be a static asset, image, JavaScript, CSS. So that gets sent to our front-end web application, which is hosted all in S3. So if it was a JavaScript or CSS file, CloudFront's going to look to, it's going to first look in its cache, see if it has that file. If it has that file, it's going to return it right to the user. If it doesn't, it's going to dip into S3 and get that file and send it back. And so that's the UI fork of the request process. On the API side, so anything that's /API is going to get sent to API gateway. If the pattern is API /events, it's going to go to EC2 server that's running that's running our events API. And if the URL has API post, it's going to go to our EC2 server that is running our post API. Now, you might think, well, so part of our pattern is to make sure that the data is kind of a separate entity from the APIs themselves. So the idea here is that the API EC2 servers will go to S3 to get the data. This means that as long as we've got a file in S3, the website will always show something. These things could go down for a day, they could go down for a year. That the data might be old, but at least you'll never see an empty page, right? So this also provided, when I talked about scaling vertically, it's not just about, so say if we wanted to add Facebook events, right? So in this architecture, this was my idea. We, similar to meetup.com, will create a new Lambda Facebook, and its responsibility will be to, just like with Meetup, find a bunch of Facebook groups, get their events, put it in S3. What's really neat now is that the events API can handle the business logic. It can go and get the Meetup data, can get the Facebook data, merge it into one. As far as the front end's concerned, it doesn't need to go fetch Facebook data separate from Meetup data, put that all together and spit it out. You can do a lot of business logic through this API. You could add filtering options. You could do pagination this way. So there's a lot of flexibility in this model as it stands. There's certainly opportunities for improvements, but I think it provides a pretty good foundation going forward as you add things. So, and if we wanted to add, say, videos, we could just add another Lambda. We might want to create another API endpoint for media content, things like that. So that's kind of how So that's kind of how our production environment is set up. As far as development, everything, so basically the only thing that you won't be able to see with your own eyes is the AWS environment. Everything else about this project is in GitHub. All our documentation, all our code, configurations for continuous integration, they're all there. So all the work was done in GitHub, so all the developers worked out of GitHub. They would open pull requests. Circle CI would run the build, run any tests, linting, style guide checks, and mark the PR as passed. We would do code reviews. Eventually, it would go in. Certain components of the website had more complete CI/CD pipelines than others. The front end was pretty much entirely automated. Whenever we merged a PR into develop, it automatically uploaded to S3, and we could see that reflected in our staging environment immediately. And it was a manual merge into master that would trigger it going into production. The Lambdas do upload to S3. That's where we host the code for Lambda that we can, and then from there we can, we can then load the Lambda file from S3 from the Lambda service. I'd like to automate that a little bit more. I'm sure, Scott, you've had some experience with that. And then lastly, with EC2, it's a little tricky, but there are ways to automate the uploading of, in our case, a jar, and then more importantly, being able to SSH into it and restart the server. So, but anyway, that's a snapshot of the technical architecture. Any other questions before I move on? Yes. Yep.
So, is it possible to put a trigger that it gets cool every time?
Yeah, as far as meetups, I'm not sure. But yeah, there are capabilities in AWS to kind of tie things in with like events and messages. The other option is we could just change the interval of the Lambda to run like once an hour instead.
Yeah, so Lambda can be triggered by CloudWatch on a periodic basis. Can be triggered by a real-time API. Small API gateway can be triggered by an event, S3 bucket change. So something that's dropped on a bucket, that second event will trigger it. It can be triggered by Dynamo update to a column in the database. It's updated and that sends an event. So it has 5 or 6 different triggers that can actually invoke it. This one, it was really not event-based. It's more just periodic. So it's triggered on that.
Yeah, so it pretty much runs at like 12:01 a.m. every morning. Just gets the latest. We can adjust that as needed based on, and independently, we can make the WordPress one update once a day. We can make the Meetup one update once an hour if we wanted. Yeah. Do you have a question?
So I'm assuming this scales really well. So if you did start to get a lot of users or whatever, and you can this would set up. So is it, how easy is it? I mean, is it the switch or does AWS handle that kind of scheme?
So really, as far as the front end goes, CloudFront's going to take care of all that for us. That's pretty much its thing. If we start seeing more traffic going to the API, we have a couple options. If it's really aggressive, and given that we're not really doing anything with authentication or anything state-based, that probably makes an even more compelling case to go with Lambda, and then we're talking about like fractions of a penny for every request. In a situation where you might need to use EC2, what you're going to do is you're going to throw a load balancer in front of maybe a couple instances. Maybe Scott could talk a little bit about this, or Darren, but yeah, there is a little kind of detective work to figure out like how big your instances need to be, then how many you need to make, and things like that. I'm not sure if there's like a good calculator, but yeah, generally when you want to have scale up, you're talking about a load balancer, and I think you can configure it when to scale for how many, what sizes. The one thing I think that's still a little tricky for me. Well, if in 3 months we start seeing really slow response times or things like that, we'll take a weekend and add a load balancer and configure it, and then, yeah. And then, again, if it gets really big, but I don't know, Scott, you might have a little more.
How you configure it, so you can put things on ELB components, elastic load balancer. You can put different EC2 instances on it, and everything is scriptable.
Yeah.
Amazon, you can fire things up, so you can build operation software to automate scanning it out based on requests and so forth. If we, like you were saying, part of this was also doing 2 different approaches, just to have different technology. If you replace the EC2 with Lambda, take a little hit on cold start, but by default, Lambda will automatically scale however you want. So if you flip out those 2 EC2 and put Lambda in, however many requests, because gateway scales just as much as well, and it all is bounded by the region. So at the end, if which has happened before, if Amazon's US East 1 region went down, then you have the second region if you really want to do it, and you have the ELB way at the top, like you're routing between west and east, and then you're covered back. But
I would just say, if you're really curious, tell all your friends to come to the website. Let's do a couple more, and then we'll get, I think, well, I guess, how are we doing on time? It's 7:30? Yeah. So let's do one more question, then I want to make sure I get through the rest of the presentation, then we can gauge it based on that. Darren, first timer.
Scalability can be very dependent on how much you want to spend, too.
Yes.
The more you use Lambda, the more it costs.
Speaking of which, we need your credit card, Joel. All right. Okay. I do need to make sure I actually show you guys the website before we all have to leave. So let me get through the next few slides, and then depending on how long we want to stay and do questions, we can figure that out. Is that cool? All right. Well, that's what we're going to do. So what's running on all these machines? Well, here we go. We got, for our Lambda, we decided to use Node.js. For our APIs running on top of our EC2 servers, we use Spring Boot, which is a Java framework. And on the front end, we're using React, so JavaScript again. So for project management, as I mentioned, we're doing all of this in GitHub. I found over the past couple of years, GitHub has done a remarkable job bringing a lot of project management and productivity features to the platform. We made extensive use of the wiki feature for very, at least in my opinion, comprehensive documentation, onboarding, application design, technical architecture. I mean, there's nothing that I'm telling you now that isn't in GitHub, in our wiki, in one place or another. Even the diagrams, it's all there. What I consider kind of GitHub flavored agile. They have similar features that we're familiar with in our work. We try and follow agile where possible and client dependent, but we like to use sprints and user stories. Acceptance criteria is huge. If you can't define done, I don't want to work on it. Workflows, getting into a good rhythm of how we do pull requests, how we do testing. So we were able to use projects and create swim lanes and kind of send issues through stages. So at any given time, you can kind of just see, oh, okay, this is in the test column, it's assigned to me. I need to go test it and give some feedback, or it's assigned to me. When I start working on it, I put it in progress. So I think we really, really flexed a lot of those features. As far as my experience, typically on our projects, we'll use Jira. I felt, very comfortable. I mean, it's certainly not as robust as an issue in GitHub. It's certainly not as robust as an issue in Jira, but we didn't necessarily need that. And also, if we didn't use these features, then we couldn't share with you what that experience was like. So project management was big. We followed familiar agile ceremonies. We had a stand-up 3 times a week. We did retrospectives. We did sprint planning. We did demos with Brian and Joel at the end of every sprint. I think we did 3 3-week sprints and then 1 4-week sprint at the end, so a total of 4. Now I'll kind of show you what those looked like. So yeah, it was great. And Sai did an awesome job. She'd never done project management before, but she jumped right in. Kept us all honest, and more importantly, kept us all on track. So for the development, we made heavy use of pull requests and code reviews. Interns or not, this is a big part of our day-to-day as developers. It's a great opportunity to show and teach new things and just collaborate on code. Continuous integration, no pull requests got merged without a passing build. And to that point, code quality was a big part of that. So unit testing, code coverage, style guide. And of course, all this was done with the, sense of learning and mentorship in mind. It was really important for, in all of these categories, that our interns really understood why we do these things, why the ceremonies that we follow are important, and really what impact that has on the relationship with the client. In this case, Brian and Joel, and that feedback that not waiting till 6 months and showing some part of a product, but really showing the progress over time. So, so you guys want to see it? Okay. Nope, I just added on the, it was casting my browser tab, not my desktop. So, surprise, yes. As I said, we did all of this in GitHub. There is a very specific reason for that. So you're not going to get to the website until I show you all the awesome work that we did. Well, I think, well, in music recording, it's very common that for 1 minute worth of music, you'll spend an hour in the studio just getting it right. So that one song takes 4 or 5 hours of production, rehearsals, and takes. Software development is no different. This is where a lot of our time is spent. We're coding, but we're also trying to leave a good reference point for other developers, especially the ones that come in after we're done, which is you guys, right? So trust me, you'll thank us for all this later. So this is the GitHub organization. Right now we've got a few projects there. This website docs repository, that is where our wiki is. So all of our wonderful documentation is in here. So we have this onboarding, this welcome page. We have, I'll show you a couple of these. So here's the application design. So Sai pretty much was the main contributor here. She did an amazing job breaking down the general features and capabilities. Here's our style guide. Philosophies on responsive design, and then ultimately some images and pictures and things like that, and all the details that go into making the website. So if you want to understand how all the different parts work, this is where you can go for that. The technical architecture is there too, like that. So all the terms that I mentioned, they're all there, that networking diagram. So we hope and we feel that it's fairly comprehensive. We have an onboarding guide. It tells you how to set up your development environment. It tells you all the tools we're using, has all the links and things like that. So, so all that is in this one repository. For project management, we use the projects feature of GitHub. This was our most recent sprint. Let me that down a little bit. So as you can see, we're still able to create swim lanes. We have 5 of them actually, so all the way through done. And so the general workflow was that we would meet before the start of a sprint. We would put all those things into the to-do column. As developers worked on them, they would go in progress. When there was time for the pull request and a review, it went to review. If more work was needed, it would move back. Ultimately, when it was merged, it would be sent into the test column. Sai would take it over from there. Alana and Kate would also help out with testing and just general product acceptance. And then when it got deployed, it would go to done. We made, as you can see, I made judicious use of all the labels, and so it was really a great way to help filter and categorize and group issues.
So what did you use Jira for?
Didn't. That's what we use for our projects, but not for this. So we were trying to get as much of that out of into GitHub as possible, and surprisingly, a lot of it was doable. We have. So I'll just give you a quick example. We can go more into it after. But here's an example of a Lambda script that we wrote to interact with the meetup.com API. So as I mentioned, right now it's just a hard-coded list of meetup groups. But we could, in the future, move this into the CMS, and then it could be entirely content managed. Right now, if you want to add your group, all you have to do is just make a pull request here, and then the next day, out it goes. And so, yeah, so this script, what it's going to do is it's going to go and get all the events for all those groups. It's also going to get the group photo, so that's why there's a couple promises happening here. And then at the end, it's going to sum it all up into one JSON response and write that to S3. So this was all written in JavaScript. It runs on a Node Lambda. So, and the Lambda for WordPress is similar, but just with the WordPress REST API instead. Here is the events API. So you'd see a similar setup for the post API, just WordPress instead of, posts instead of events. So like most typical Java projects, you have your main and test. Then we have our models, configs, controllers, services, things like that. So just kind of gives you an example of what that code base looks like. And then the front end, which was written in React, built with Webpack, using Yarn. We have very component-based approach. So here's a number of the components that we're using. So just kind of gives you an idea of our structure there. So put that all together, and you get this. So this is the landing page. I want a big, fortunately he's not here, but a big thank you to Darius for providing a number of the banner images that you'll see when you load the site. Our intrepid CTO even provided a picture in there. So this was kind of exciting for us to, so basically the community's already contributed to the website already. And so you land on pvdgeeks.org. So the first thing you'll see is the upcoming events in the community. So, yep. So we'll show you 6 at a time, and then you can load more, and just keep scrolling. There's opportunities to maybe do some infinite scrolling, things like that. And then if you click one, it'll take you to the meetup page there. So really what we wanted to do was be able to kind of curate, oh, hey. We did it. All right. So really what we wanted to be able to do was kind of give you a one-stop shop for a number of the events that you're most likely to be interested in being a Providence geek. And then the ability to share through Facebook. I'm not going to log in, but Twitter, something like that. There's nothing you need to see there. So then we have the blog posts. And so we have one here from Alana, just to kind of get things going. So what's really interesting about this is pulling from WordPress, the WordPress that we have, but from the WordPress REST API. So just like our events, we're just getting raw JSON, and then we're able to display. So the image, the text, it's all coming from a REST API. And then if I click it, we get the full banner image there. It swaps out the rotating images that were there before, and it has a number of sharing options here, and then the content. So there's one issue I have to fix. The images from WordPress don't load over HTTPS, so I gotta fix that, and that will make that load. It's only, so the website loads over HTTPS, and currently the WordPress instance is only under HTTP. Yeah, exactly. So
you said earlier that you copy the content. It's only text you copy.
Nope. I'll show. So I can show you what it looks like. So here's what So this is what the website is loading to load the events. It's loading, it's making a REST call to API events. And so this is essentially what's coming out of S3. So when the Lambda makes the request to meet up to get all the events and saves it as a JSON file, it's essentially just returning this. Right? And then similar to, and it's just like for posts. So as you can see, there's all the content. It's already got the HTML formatting coming from WordPress, but it's got classes, it's got elements, so you can still target it with CSS just like any other content that you embed on a page.
The CloudFront isn't being used to deliver that image there. Is that correct?
For the WordPress and Meetup, those are being hosted by Meetup and WordPress themselves. Well, in our case, our WordPress instance, in Meetup, the events case, they're all being hosted on meetup.com. So that's what. So we're just displaying what's being given to us by the API.
Do you have caching on CloudFront for the APIs too, or is it just the static?
Not the APIs, because those are going to be like refreshing once a day anyway. So, did you have your? Okay, you want to toss the catch box around, Scott?
Long-term.
We're almost towards
When
the
you
end.
swap between questions, I guess.
Yeah, well, we're almost towards the end, so we could probably just leave it on. It's not making any noise.
How do you for CloudFront? How do you invalidate the cache whenever you push a new version out?
Great question. I'm actually glad you asked that. So traditionally, let me put something a little more. interesting on the screen. So, I can show you, actually. So traditionally, it was common to create a file name that had, or a file path that had a version number in it. So the big downside with that was generally what that meant is on every release, when you incremented the version, every single file would have a file path change. The problem with that is that not necessarily every file actually changed its contents. One thing that Webpack is really good at is, in addition to creating bundles, it will create a file name that is a hash based on the contents of the files right here. So you see styles dot blah 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 dot CSS. So essentially, as Webpack builds our project for us, we can tell it to create a file name based on the contents of the file, which means that if the file doesn't change, the hash won't change, which means you can continue to cache that file. There's no more adding a cache buster, no more just nuclear option of always invalidating every cache. So basically the answer is I don't have to do anything. So I just build it with Webpack, and it gets uploaded to S3, and then CloudFront takes care of it from there. Just hits our, so basically our index.html doesn't get cached, but all the files in it will, based on the hash, and so we let the browser take care of that. This was a big thing that I implemented through some performance audits using Google's Lighthouse, basically working to make the Providence Geeks website fairly PWA compliant. The whole progressive web app compliant. The whole thing's not in place, but this was one of the big ones, was caching and cache busting and things like that. Darren.
First of all, comment, that's really cool, really nice idea with the hashing there. But I also want to say that if you really screw up, you can send in a caching validation request to CloudFront.
Yes.
And you only get so many of those per,
yes.
per day, per hour.
It's per file. So like, but yeah, that's a, actually let me go here. So yeah, that's a great point. CloudFront does let you manually invalidate or apply invalidations rather. Where is it? I could do that as well. So I have a Webpack configuration which handles the uploading to S3. So this is pretty much it. So as you can see, all I do is I invalidate index.html. That's it. And then index.html is going to have the latest with whatever hashed files there are, or file paths there are. So that, yeah, pretty much takes care of it. So I mean, one file, once a release, and you get a limit, like you have up to this many before it costs you something. So I mean, we'd have to be releasing like every minute, every day to really ever get there. So, yeah. So yes, so that's the website. We have these links will help you share and follow Providence Geeks on social media. And so with that, what's next? So we really want this to be community driven at this point. So our goal was to try and establish some good patterns and practices, some good documentation, some good examples of some project management and organization that we feel we can hopefully entice the community into participating in. We also have a number of initiatives that we would love to help anybody else contribute to, furthering the development of the product. What's the next thing you guys want to see? Do you want to see Twitter? You want to see YouTube videos from meetups? You tell us. We have there's a website backlog repo in the organization. If you want to submit feature requests, that's the place to do it. There's already a couple there. And what we want to do is be able to talk about proposals there and then promote them up to like the front end repo or some other repository to track the issue. So we want to be able to have our discussion in one place and then the actual execution and carrying it out in another place. We got plenty of front end work. If anybody is interested in especially responsive design, we have a lot of opportunities there. Maybe if someone really wants to flex some CSS muscles, help us go entirely native CSS with just Flexbox CSS grid. We can get rid of any sort of bootstrap dependencies there. That would be really awesome. Documentation, reading it, telling us what we're missing. Hopefully through contributing into the project, we'll naturally find any sort of gaps in our documentation. We want to provide guides for contributing content, blog posts to Brian and Joel. I want to put together some guides for how to put together the next set of lambdas and APIs. So the guide, the kind of the mental guide that I went through, I want to document that, and then we'll want to make sure people can, understand it. So that's really important. A big one of mine personally is performance. I'm still working on more optimizations to make the site PWA compliant. Progressive web applications, which really aims to deliver an awesome experience at like 3G speed. So Lighthouse, which is a tool developed by Google, essentially audits your page against a 3G low-powered device and then gives you a rating based on that. So that's what I've been doing a lot of work on and slowly bringing that up. I actually am going to be really excited tomorrow to share an article series that I've started. It's 2 parts, and it'll actually document my journey to getting the score where it is now. Spoiler alert, performance started with 0, or just a simple React app and a few components, but with a few clicks and in a couple of weekends, I got that score right back up there. So I'll be happy to share all that in the Providence Geeks Slack tomorrow. If you don't know what the Providence Geeks Slack is, then please reach out to me. There's a great community there for people to share ideas, work on projects, find out about other meetups, and stay in touch with them. Automation, if you're interested in bash scripting, like I mentioned earlier, we could use some help automating the deployment of the APIs and the lambdas, things like that. So if that's something you're interested in, and of course, feedback. Use it, tell us what you want. Join us in Slack. That's probably the best place to reach us. Brian and Joel are there, I'm there, a lot of Kenzan people are there, so even Darren's there. So yeah, yeah, you. So and really, use this as an opportunity to practice things you want to experiment in, to get stronger in the things that you like. There's a lot of opportunities for whatever your interests are, and it's not all about code. So with that, so as I mentioned, to get involved, thanks for the slide. We have our onboarding wiki. That's a good place to start. Slack, ask us for an invite. And I guess we got a little time, so any last questions? Darren.
This is going to be...
I'm waiting for this one. Go.
So being a Rhode Island native, really into theme painters, great. into it.
I'll let Alana know.
I do have a feature request already, and I've been at Kenzan about 7 years now. The reason I got the job, it was a job board called RI Nexus.
Ah, yes.
No longer exists anymore. My feature request is to have a job board.
Yes.
Well, just that.
Okay.
But yeah, maybe something similar, like a hub, like a hub.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and for historical purposes, our Nexus was run by Jack Templin, who was the co-founder of Providence Geeks. Also, there was a lot of shared, we kind of shared the brain between our Nexus and Providence Geeks, so that would be, that's cool. That you found it our Nexus, that's awesome.
I like that, Darren. Yeah, I think, oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that was definitely something that came up in the early conversations, that was a feature that we were interested in. We would love to see that added. I think when we narrowed things down, we decided let's start with where people are very active in the community, and then that would be something that we could offer that.
We could do that as a lambda too. I mean, we could pull from, lots of,
Yeah, I think.
I think we have to do that.
Yeah, one thing that I realized I left on the last slide is anybody that's really interested in getting into design, Darren's got an idea who wants to help, visualize it. Let's turn it into, a mock-up. We can get some acceptance criteria. We can get some issues. I'll help with getting all that, and we can get it going from there. So, Darren, I expect to see you opening an issue in website backlog very soon.
Maybe see some PRs.
Oh! Don't get me too excited. Any other questions? Yes.
You talked about the decision of the domain name to providencegeeks.com versus geeks.org.
Someone's squatting on the other one.
The person who has providencegeeks.com is really busy right now. Just haven't done the transfer. But honestly, a shorter URL is generally preferable. We'll probably end up with both, but shorter still counts. The letters in the URL is part of your tweet, right? I mean, now that we have,
280.
I know it doesn't matter as much, but when we made the decision, it was it was 140. So.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah.
Somebody who grew up in Warwick, I do have this issue with, conflating the airport and the city. But do we still have the sign up that says no matter what the pilot might have said, you landed in Warwick?
I'll go crazy, so I don't worry about that.
Any other questions? Thoughts, feedback? Things you want Darren to work on?
I think it was really great.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yes.